What happened next is something I wish I could undo. That night I crossed a line I swore I never would with Eli. I shattered the trust of the man who had only ever loved me purely. And in the worst part of it all, for a brief heart-pounding moment, I didn't regret it. But that moment didn't last. Because the next morning, I saw Daniel standing in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had changed. Like his world hadn't just cracked in half while he slept peacefully under the weight of a lie. I looked at him and I knew. I had done the unthinkable. And still I couldn't walk away. To the lovers of Hearts Awakened, I am so proud of you all. Thank you for your support and love. If you're coming across my video for the first time, kindly subscribe and hit on notifications. You think you know yourself, what you're capable of, what lines you'd never cross. I thought so too. I had a man who loved me, a ring on my finger, a wedding date circled in red. But one moment changed everything. A look. A touch. A silence I didn't know how to break. And before I could stop myself, I had done the unthinkable. This is not a story I'm proud to tell. But it's mine. And it begins with Daniel. Daniel was the man every woman dreams of marrying. Steady, kind, thoughtful in ways that never asked for recognition. We met in college. He was 2 years ahead of me, majoring in architecture, with a calm, serious presence that grounded everyone around him. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the type to sweep you off your feet with grand gestures. Instead, he made you feel like home. By the time he proposed to me, we had already shared 5 years of memories, road trips, late-night coffees, moving into our first apartment. So when he knelt down in the middle of a quiet garden on a Thursday evening and asked me to be his wife, it wasn't a surprise. It was a quiet, perfect certainty. I said yes. Of course I said yes. But life has a way of testing certainty. And my test came in the form of Eli. Daniel's younger brother. Eli was nothing like Daniel. Where Daniel was reserved, Eli was vibrant. Where Daniel calculated every move, Eli danced through life with the wild freedom that pulled everyone into his orbit. He had that kind of beauty that stopped conversations. Sharp jawline, stormy eyes, a smirk that could unravel the most composed soul. And when he walked into our lives 1 month after our engagement, just passing through town, I felt something shift in the air. I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just admiration. Just a harmless crush. But that's the thing about lies. They sound reasonable when you whisper them to yourself. Daniel welcomed him with open arms. I remember the night Eli arrived. He hugged his brother tightly, then turned to me and said, "So you're the lucky woman," with a wink that made my stomach flutter in a way I didn't want to admit. Over the following weeks, Eli became a regular presence. He had no job, no commitments, just time. And he used it well. Charming everyone, including me. It started innocently. A joke here, a late-night chat there. Shared glances across the living room when Daniel was busy cooking or working late. Nothing physical. Nothing obvious. But the tension built like a storm you try to ignore until lightning cracks the sky. I should have said something. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday. Funny how life-altering moments choose ordinary days. Daniel had been called in for an overnight project, and Eli and I were left alone in the apartment. We watched a movie, something mindless, forgettable, and somewhere between the second and third drink, I let my guard fall. We laughed too easily, sat too close, and then I looked into his eyes, and I saw something dangerous looking back at me, and I didn't walk away. What happened next is something I wish I could undo. I crossed a line I swore I never would. I shattered the trust of the man who had only ever loved me purely. And in the worst part of it all, for a brief heart-pounding moment, I didn't regret it. But that moment didn't last. Because the next morning, I saw Daniel standing in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had changed. Like his world hadn't just cracked in half while he slept peacefully under the weight of a lie. I looked at him and I knew. I had done the unthinkable. And still I couldn't walk away. The day after it happened, everything felt louder. Daniel stirring his coffee, the faucet dripping, the sound of my own heartbeat. I tried to move through the day like nothing had shifted, like the ground beneath me wasn't on the verge of caving in. But guilt is a cruel companion. It doesn't whisper. It screams. Daniel didn't notice. Or if he did, he said nothing. That was almost worse. I kept looking for signs, something, anything that he knew. A flicker in his eyes, a colder tone in his voice. But he was the same Daniel. Kind. Steady. Trusting. He kissed my forehead before he left for work, reminded me to eat lunch, and asked what color napkins we wanted for the wedding reception. Napkins. We were planning our future while I was hiding the single most shameful moment of my life. I couldn't tell him. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to break him. You think that once you do something wrong, you'll confess. That remorse will push you into honesty. But I've learned that shame doesn't always lead to truth. Sometimes it makes you quiet. It makes you cowardly. And I was both. Eli didn't say a word either. He stayed in the guest room, quiet, keeping to himself for the first time since he arrived. When I saw him in the hallway the next evening, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. And honestly, I was relieved. But that relief didn't last. Because silence between people who have secrets becomes a living thing. It grew in that apartment. It followed me. Every word Daniel spoke felt like it passed through a fog. I started to flinch when he touched me. I laughed too hard at jokes. I kissed him like I was trying to erase a memory. But you can't kiss away betrayal. A week passed. Then two. And then came the dinner. Daniel's parents invited us all for a family meal. They hadn't seen Eli in over a year, and they were eager to hear his stories, his travels, his photography, his usual parade of charisma. I spent the entire day rehearsing how to act normal, how to sit across from the man I had betrayed Daniel with, and still smile in front of his family. It was worse than I imagined. We sat around a table that was too long, too well lit. Daniel's mom passed the potatoes like she was passing peace, and his dad made jokes that I couldn't hear over the pounding in my head. Eli, for his part, was charm itself. He joked. He smiled. He deflected questions about relationships with practiced ease. But every so often I caught his eyes on me. Just for a second. And those glances were like knives. Daniel didn't notice. Or he pretended not to. Later that night when we got home, Daniel turned to me in the dark and said, "You've been different lately. Are you okay?" That moment shattered something in me. I opened my mouth to speak, to confess, to beg for forgiveness. But nothing came out. Just a nod. A lie wrapped in silence. He didn't push. He just pulled me close and said, "I love you, Em. No matter what." And in that moment I hated myself more than I ever thought possible. Over the next few days I began spiraling. I avoided Eli completely. I made excuses not to be in the same room with him. I threw myself into wedding planning like it was a lifeline. Cake tastings, invitation designs, dress fittings. I tried to drown the guilt in tulle and frosting. But guilt doesn't drown. One night, unable to sleep, I got up and went to the living room. And there he was, Eli, sitting in the dark. We didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You're going to marry him, aren't you?" I nodded. And he replied, "Good. He deserves that. You both do." It should have felt like closure. But it felt like a door slamming shut on a room I was still trapped inside. I should have come clean. But instead I buried it. Believing, hoping, that if I just kept moving forward, the past would lose its grip on me. But the truth is, the past always finds a way back. And mine would arrive sooner than I ever imagined, wearing a tux, carrying a smile, and standing at the altar waiting for a bride who no longer deserved him. Weddings are supposed to be the most joyful day of your life. Mine felt like a punishment wrapped in silk. Everything looked perfect. The weather was a flawless blue. The flowers arrived on time. My dress fit like a dream. Guests took their seats with smiles, unaware that beneath my veil I was trembling, not from excitement, but from the unbearable weight of what I was hiding. Daniel was waiting for me at the end of the aisle. Looking at him, I felt like I was staring at everything I ever wanted, everything I had broken. And yet, I kept walking. The ceremony blurred around me. The vows, the music, the light drizzle of laughter at our inside jokes. I heard myself promise forever while my heart screamed in protest. Daniel looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing in the world, like I was untouched by pain or deceit. He had no idea. And then came the part that undid me. The officiant said, "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The room fell silent. I could hear my breath, my heartbeat. I waited, almost hoping, irrationally, that someone would speak, that Eli would stand up, that the world would stop this before I had to. But no one spoke, not even me. And so I said I do. The reception was a blur of music and lights. People danced, toasted, clinked glasses. I smiled for photos I never wanted to look at again. I laughed at stories I wasn't listening to. Eli avoided mentirely. I saw him once across the room, leaning against a wall, watching from the shadows. We didn't speak, and I didn't want to. The guilt had stopped being sharp. Now it was a quiet, aching presence, like a bruise you can't stop pressing, just to remind yourself it's real. Later that night, Daniel and I were alone in the hotel suite, sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked at me and said, "You've been quiet lately, even today. Is something wrong?" That was my moment. It could have been my confession, my freedom, my truth. But I looked at him, the man who had just vowed his life to me, who had never given me a single reason to doubt his love. And I said, "No, just tired." Weeks passed. We moved into our new place, sent thank you cards, settled into married life. And then it happened. I came home one evening and found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with a letter in his hand. Not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter addressed to him, from Eli. My stomach dropped. He didn't look up when I entered, just stared at the words on the page like they had physically hurt him. I stood frozen, waiting. Finally he said, "How long?" My voice cracked. "Daniel." He looked up then, and I will never forget the look in his eyes. Not anger, not even heartbreak, just devastation. Quiet, complete devastation. He didn't yell. He didn't demand. He simply said, "I need you to leave." And I did. The weeks that followed were a blur of empty apartments, late-night drives, and questions I had no answers for. I reached out to Daniel, calls, messages, letters. He never replied. Not once. As for Eli, he disappeared. Maybe out of shame. Maybe out of guilt. Or maybe because he knew that what we had destroyed could never be undone. It's been over a year now. People still ask why the marriage ended so quickly. I never tell them. How do you explain that you lit your own house on fire and expected to sleep peacefully in it? Sometimes I still see Daniel in my dreams. Not as the man I betrayed, but as the man I should have protected. The man who loved me enough to build a life with me, only for me to crush it before it even began. They say time heals, but some wounds don't want to heal. Some stay open not to punish but to remind. To whisper you were trusted, and you broke it. So yes, I saw him doing the unthinkable. Standing at the altar, eyes full of love for a woman he thought he knew. And still I couldn't walk away. But maybe I should have. If you find this story interesting, kindly subscribe, like and comment below. See you on the next one.